Welcome to YPO Innovation Week. Welcome to this panel on breakthrough business models today on May 11th, 2017. We're now live on air. We're also recording this session, so it may be viewed in different time zones around the globe and promoted publicly on our external website, social media. For those who are listening in, if you want to tweet, use hashtag #ThisIsInnovation. For the YPO members who are used to GCCs, we will not have a public Q&A at the end. However, do feel free to use the chat box to send us your questions anytime. I will see them. I will integrate them into the flow, so don't wait to the end. Now, as we get started, allow me to introduce myself. I am Martin Wilderer. I'm CEO of Environmental Quality Intelligence. I'm a YPO member here in London and learning chair of the YPO's Sustainable Business Network. I like describing myself as an environmental capitalist. I started my career in the corporate world, first in wastewater treatment, then power engineering, 11 years of that in China. I have more recently went into the disruption space, first with electric vehicles, now in data analytics. I am extremely excited, I can tell you, about this panel we've put together today, since it actually captures two of my passions. One, I'm very passionate about finding business solutions to global grand challenges, to really use business as a force for good. And as John Elkington just highlighted in a recent Harvard Business Review article, it's a $12 trillion market opportunity. On the other hand, I had the privilege to join YPO's first Singularity University program, and got completely amazed, thrilled, and I'm a disciple of their teaching. Amazed by the speed of the technology which is being developed, by the opportunity which comes along with it, but also the responsibility. The change of market, the change of organizations, but also leadership. And hence been very much looking actually at innovation management. And here we are today, merging those two worlds. We're going to look how business modeling can be a solution for those global grand challenges, how the Sustainable Development Goals drive business, and how to go about it. We'll get three very different cases, looking at the similarities, the differences, the success factors, but also the threat points. Core to this event today is John Elkington, here today with us. John, maybe you want to just wave for the crowd. John is a member of the B team, of the likes of Richard Branson, Paul Pullman, Arianna Huffington, all of them well known to our community. John, you framed the terms like triple bottom line, people, planet, profit, and we're using them very often all over the world. We've already had an exciting GCC, which introduced the basis for today's conversation. Whoever has missed that, go to the recording. John is behind a very thrilling project together with UN Global Compact called Project Breakthrough. And it's exactly combining the teaching of exponentiality with the Sustainable Development Goals. With us as well, we have three amazing panelists, three different companies in three territories, three different sizes. It's CEO of Covestra, to many maybe better known as Biomaterial Science, as it was formerly, Patrick Thomas. We have with us CEO of CARE in Singapore and YPO member, Justin Taylor. And CFO of Norwegian iconic Bright Products, John Sharun. So with this, allow me to hand over to John to introduce us to these three panelists closest and tell us, why did we select these three?
Thank you, Martin, and a great pleasure to be involved in this panel session. And I just wanted to start with an observation, which is, I know that Patrick Thomas of Covestra, who we'll hear about or hear from in a moment, is currently in Brussels with Plastics Europe, which is an industry federation. And I was just reflecting that 20, 30 years ago, industry and trade federations were absolutely the enemy. They fought change. You mentioned safety, health, environment, those issues. Then as the agenda expanded into in environmental sustainability and then sustainable development, federations and associations are often just a brake on progress. And I think it's fascinating now to see the way in which a range of business-to-business platforms are not only just trying to be neutral in this space, but they're really actively involved. So you mentioned the B team, but it's true of the World Economic Forum, of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. It's true of the Global Compact, which we'll talk about in a moment. And it's also true of the YPO itself. And I'm quite struck by the motto of the YPO, which is, as I understand it, lifelong learning. And I've been in this environmental and sustainability space now for over 40 years professionally. And by God, it's a lifelong learning opportunity. And I think we're going to learn a lot from our three panelists. Just a little bit of framing before I say why we picked these three. 5 years ago in London, we convened something called the Breakthrough Capitalism Forum. And this was a TED-style event, 27 speakers, and basically getting people to stretch their imaginations, stretch their horizons, try and move a little bit beyond the sort of conventional forms of corporate social responsibility and even shared value, to think about systemic solutions. And initially, that was quite a tough row to hoe. I mean, there was interest, but not as much interest as we had initially hoped. And then late 2015, things really started to take off. And for example, we started a multi-year program with the UN Global Compact, which I've already mentioned. 9,000 companies involved, so it's the biggest sustainable business platform in the world. We also started to work with the Business and Sustainable Development Commission, which pulls together over 40 commissioners, and they come from WBCSD, from the B team, from the Global Compact, from the World Economic Forum, and so on. And the figure that you gave of 12 trillion euros or dollars, that is a number for the year 2030, by which it is forecast that the value of just 4 out of 60 market hotspots that collectively play into the Sustainable Development Goal opportunity space, just 4 of those 60 hotspots predicted to be worth $12 trillion a year. One of the points that is made is that if things go significantly better in terms of policy frameworks and so on, that number could be 2 to 3 times higher. So we're at a point in all of this where instead of simply thinking about risk and efficiency and how do we find the money to do what we know what we have to do, suddenly capitalism is starting to sniff real opportunities, which brings me then on to the three panelists. And the first one is indeed Covestro. Patrick will, I'm sure, give a bit of the history. I've known Patrick since 1989 and off and on worked with him. He's one of the people, I was saying to Lisa Kingo, who runs the Global Compact just the other day, that in a way, Covestro at the moment reminds me of where Novo Nordisk was in the late 80s, early 1990s, a company that became almost an iconic, defining leadership company. And Covestro is IPOing out of the Bayer group, but I think one of the things that really lives on in my imagination is something that Patrick said, or it was a German business magazine that I think initially said it, that Covestro is a 12 billion euro, 80-some-year-old startup. And I think in a sense, what we've all got to have now is that startup mentality. So we'll hear from Patrick in a moment. Care, based in Singapore mainly, we came across when we were doing a project last year for the Business and Sustainable Development Commission on what we call breakthrough business models. And it's quite interesting that a really big book's just come out, edited by Paul Hawken, who some of your listeners will know of. It's called Drawdown, and it looks at a range of different sectors of activity across the global economy and considers which ones are making the biggest contribution in a negative sense to climate change. and then considers where the greatest opportunity for change might be. And interestingly, the top, in a sense, offending sector is refrigeration and air conditioning. So Care plays into that space with a business model which is built around air conditioning as a service. So it'd be great to hear what Justin has to say on all of that. And then Bright, based in Norway, I only came across a few months back when I was speaking at a conference in Kristiansand there, and met Bright's CEO. And what they're doing is solar lamps. And there are a growing number of organizations playing into that space. How do you get solar-powered lighting and mobile telephone recharging and so on into the sort of bottom of the pyramid, base of the pyramid world? And Bright absolutely at the forefront of that. But what really struck me about what they're doing, and just to go back to Covestro, one of their 3 values is around colorful. These lanterns are wonderfully colorful and beautifully designed. I mean, the design is almost akin to what Apple would be doing in this sort of space. So that's it from me. I'll hand back to you, Martin, but just to say it's great to be part of Global Innovation Week and very much look forward to what happens next.
Fantastic. So thank you, John, for this introduction. And with that, I would actually instantly like to go to our panelists and ask you about your vision. So where do you actually see your companies playing in? Where do you see yourself or the company in 3 to 5 years? What dream are your companies following? And maybe let's start with that iconic brand, Johan, Bright. You're bringing light to the world. Tell us about your vision.
Yes, that's right. So our mission is to help the 1.3 billion people that currently are without electricity and without the basic service you get from having access to electricity. And what we see now with the new trends in solar power technology, with the cost reductions of about 70% the last 6-7 years. Battery technologies, same type of cost reduction, and for example, LEDs as well, have about the 90% cost reduction. So riding that wave, we now think we are able to actually crack that code of getting electricity directly to those people who so far, I've been in the energy industry for about 15 years, and I always heard about the 1 billion people, and we tried different solutions for that. But the old solution of generating power and then distributing it by grid has not worked for obvious reasons. Now we actually have the opportunity or the ability to produce power where the people are. And we started off with a small product, the Sunbell, our solar lantern, that gives light and it gives ability to charge the phone, which is a great service, but we can build a lot more around that. The house systems that are in the market now is basically you set a solar panel on your roof, you have a battery, you can then have a range of services from light to fan, radio, a TV, a refrigerator. We have pilots now for health stations in Zambia where we power a refrigerator for medicines and remotely monitor that they always have the right temperature and do power prioritization, etc. So our vision is to crack that code of distributing our products, and also there's 2 main challenges for us to reach those customers: is to get the distribution right in a very different environment, and to crack the code of affordability, meaning that our products have a great business case for the end user. But the problem with solar is you have to make the payment upfront since it's free to use. So how do we solve that finance challenge? I'm sure I can come back to that point. But
to put this a little bit into perspective, you're actually not very old as a company. You've just come into the market a couple of years ago, and you have already gained some incredible success in Africa. If you just want to give us a little bit the dimension of your work.
Yeah, that's right. We were founded in 2011, and it all started off with the Sunbell, the lantern you mentioned. And we were lucky to early get the order with the UN, the UNHCR, those who run all the refugee camps. So since 2014, they have ordered more than 1.4 million lamps from us, distributing across all refugee camps. So with that, we more or less grown organically. And the last years, so beginning of 2016, we were 2 employees. Now we are 11, and we're growing. We'll be 15 after summer. So we have a solid cash flow this year, and also some resources, so we can really work to develop our product lines and also distribution. But really cracking the code would be to enter the commercial markets and selling directly. Our business model is for the commercial markets is to sell to distributors locally. So we engage with distributors that are already on the ground in Africa, and enable them to sell to their customers by integrating pay-as-you-go technology that I mentioned, etc. So we're working on, of course, the UN and the NGO market to get sell products in that land. But really, we believe the key to scalable and to reach all those 1.3 million customers is to crack the commercial.
The distribution part.
Brilliant. Yeah.
Now, on a very different angle comes care. You are much older. You are in that important market of air conditioning. What is your dream? What is your vision? But also give us a little bit your introduction to care.
So thank you, Martin. I was pleased to hear Patrick can still describe himself as a startup when he's the size he is, because that makes me feel very good about us describing ourselves as a startup, even though we've been at it for 17 years. And what John alluded to in terms of the challenge for the environment, obviously buildings and air conditioning and refrigeration are a very big issue for the environment, particularly in the part of the world we are in, which is Southeast Asia. We'll have a climate which generally requires treatment there, whether it's for human comfort on a residential sense or for business or commercial operations all year round. Our vision, Martin, is that we really want to move so many people from the world into our world, because every time we do that, it's better for the planet, it's better for the people who own the buildings, and it's better for the people who are in the buildings. We operate today in a world where we can, I think we see things in the next 3 to 5 years coming into play, which are also like health. And the interesting thing for us is that we find ourselves now, I think, because of our values and what we've achieved, we're being taken into other parts of the world where it's not just air conditioning, it's also heating. So what we're very excited about is continuing to make an impact. Every time we go into a building, we come out the other side and we say it's better for the people and it's better for the planet, and we love that.
Brilliant. So your basically big thing is, and success is actually that you have translated from trying to push out very efficient technology to actually, instead of pushing out the technology, pushing out air, and through that sort of onboarding, in-housing the entire issue of efficiency.
Yeah, so I have a confession to make. We started as a family business 60 years ago in Southeast Asia, and we were the first people to introduce air conditioning. So we were the first people to put it in. I think we, 50 years later, became the first people to go around and start taking it out. There were plenty still following us who were putting it in. We then found ourselves moving from being product sellers to we evolved into systems and solutions, and then we've evolved into our latest iteration, which is now we just sell air. We are branded and we sell air. So we will design, build, and operate the systems for big users, and we will sell them the air they want, where they want, when they want, with the specs that they want, and they only pay for the consumption. So it's become like a model. If we go to the cloud today, because that's where they store our software and our data, we're offering that sort of a business model, a consumption model to people with air. And it lets us focus on, having given them the economic benefit up front in terms of a fixed rate for the air and the conditions they want, it lets us focus entirely on how we can continue to achieve those conditions for less money and less impact on the world.
Fantastic. Which is a nice lead now to that other little startup in our circle. Patrick, what is your vision? How does Covestro fit into this space? A company which I would have instantly not really thought of being here a leader in the sustainability, coming from chemicals, coming from a part which I would still think a lot of people probably instantly think, oh, that's dirty, that's dangerous. So give us your views.
So, yeah, you're never actually more than a couple of meters away from any of our products, wherever you are in the world. And in fact, whether you're with Care or with Bright, you are probably using our materials somewhere in your installations. We're one of the biggest producers of insulation material, which is used around buildings. And we work particularly on air-conditioned buildings because they are the biggest energy consumers normally compared to heated buildings. So what does Covestro do? We make a whole range of materials which are used in almost every sector through transportation and insulation, through the construction industry, in the electronic space. One of the reasons you're never more than 2 meters from us is probably you have a smart device in your pocket and our materials are captured very efficiently in there to provide unique functionality. I guess why we call ourselves a startup company after 80 years of existence and with 16,000 employees just about everywhere in the world is because we completely reset our agenda and our strategy in a way which John has helped a lot with over the years in creating my thought process that actually the way you build a fast-growing company, a startup company like us, is by focusing on those hotspots. The Sustainability Development Goals are a huge source of profitable growth, and we match our business strategy to those growth opportunities. Now, how do we do that? Well, firstly, we test every innovation idea and concept and project at every stage of the funnel against a triple bottom line. So we don't introduce products unless they are getting at least 2 pluses and 1 neutral against people, planet, profit. And so that builds a portfolio of materials that are likely to be successful. And the reason we experience such strong growth rates, and for example, with the greening of the Chinese economy, we saw 18% growth last year in China. That's because we're substituting old school materials with modern materials. And that substitution drives our growth. And that growth is what drives the value of the enterprise. So it's a very simple business model. And I mean, some examples of the sort of innovations we've been involved in. Very recently, we worked on the idea of using carbon dioxide as a source of the carbon in our polymers. We need carbon. We build a lot of our molecules out of carbon. And we thought about using carbon dioxide, and we set up what we call the Dream Reaction Center in Aachen University in Germany, where we developed completely new chemistry that allows us to polymerize carbon dioxide and substitute oil and gas as a raw material in some of the materials we make for the furniture industry, but also for the insulation and cold chain industry. So about 20% of the oil can be substituted already with today's materials. And we've gone from dream to actual market acceptance in less than 10 years. So these are very fast, by our standards in our industry, innovations. And we're now developing new materials that can go into that space using carbon dioxide and using methane, which, as you know, is a even more significant global warming potential. So using these materials as feedstocks is a very, very powerful way of improving the performance against one of the key sustainable development goals. And finally, just to give you an idea of the sort of thing we've been involved in, when Bertrand Piccard set across with his Solar Impulse aeroplane to fly around the world, we were the materials partner. We helped do the impossible. There was a dream to build an aeroplane that could fly around the world without a drop of fuel, and we engaged in finding ways of doing that using our materials to help build something which the entire aircraft industry said was impossible. But we've done it, and that technology you now find inside refrigerators, which are A triple star plus rated. they're in vehicles, providing lightweighting for e-mobility, and they're in the coatings that are actually used in the textile industry for waterborne coating without the use of solvents. So across almost every sector, we're finding this driver towards these hotspots is driving our growth and our profitability.
So you're really there in changing the materials which we are experiencing every day into sustainable and safe materials, which is of course a huge endeavor. But something just to highlight that, which at least impressed me massively in our preparation, you said basically 100% of your R&D has to align with the Sustainable Development Goals. Is that correct?
Yeah, we use John's invention of the triple bottom line as a sort of first stage test on whether or not we'll continue with a concept. So we look at people, planet, profit as a sort of filter stage in our development pipeline. And we're willing to accept 2 ticks and 1 neutral, but nothing less than that. And a lot of the projects we look at just do not pass that test, so they don't go any further and don't receive funding. But we spend about $1/3 billion a year in research and development. And if you align that level of resource spending with the triple bottom line, targeting the hotspots of the Sustainable Development Goals, then you build a business that grows. That's as simple as that. And as you all know, in business, once you're across the hurdle of the cost of capital, growth is what drives the value of the enterprise. And last year we grew at 9%. The year before that, above 7%. This first quarter, we've grown at a tremendous rate. This growth is driven by this substitution of old world materials with new, modern, super efficient, low carbon footprint, efficient materials, either based on bio feedstocks or based on things like carbon dioxide.
Wow. So here we have 3 companies from the materials and future-proofing materials we use to air conditioning, energy intense, to bringing light to those who are not even connected to any grid. 3 very different examples, 3 exciting examples. John, I mean, you are involved in the project Breakthrough. You selected them. How do you see them fitting into the bigger pictures? Are these unique, or is this now a drive? Give us your views.
Maybe I should just say a little bit about Project Breakthrough, Martin. This is an initiative developed with the UN Global Compact. It's online at this moment. It's called projectbreakthrough.io. And what we're trying to do is to look around the world to find examples of businesses primarily, but equally we could be talking about cities or national governments over time that are experimenting with very different approaches to getting to the Sustainable Development Goal targets by 2030. And one of the points we often make to audiences, I was in Paris yesterday with several hundred supply chain people from around the world. Before that, I was in places like India and Israel. And the point that we're making is that the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, that increasingly are being embraced by leadership companies, are not simply an incremental agenda. In a sense, a lot of people are looking at them at the moment and they're saying 17 Sustainable Development Goals, 169 targets. What are we already doing that maps onto that space? Can we sort of tick some boxes here? And some people are going away feeling if they just do a little bit more, a little bit faster, a little bit better, that will get us to where we need to be. And that's absolutely not the case. I mean, because the Sustainable Development Goals, whether or not people currently realize it, are exponential goals, because they talk about zero hunger and no poverty and so on. Now, even if we could reach those goals by 2050, they'd be exponential. To even think of doing that by the 2030s is off the scale ambitious. So part of what we're doing is linking up the Global Compact and its member companies with some of the really interesting players that are starting to emerge, particularly in the United States, particularly in California, and particularly there in Silicon Valley. People like the X Prize Foundation, Google X, Singularity University, you mentioned them. And these are people who are not, basically, that if you boil down what they're saying, it's that 1% change a year, even 10% change a year is not going to be enough if we're going to meet these sorts of collective targets. We have to think in terms of 10x or tenfold change, almost as a minimum. And that may sound impossible, off the scale, improbable, but as we've heard, several of the panelists have already mentioned achieving the apparently impossible. We think that if you look at an area like solar cells, their cost has come down by at least a factor of 10 in recent years. If you look at the installed capacity of wind power around the world, it's gone up by at least a factor of 10 over the last 10 or 11 years. So these sort of shifts are happening. Your question about why these three, and are these almost the only ones we could find? Well, once upon a time, that would have been the case. I mean, most companies were focusing on corporate social responsibility, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if we had gone out to look for companies that were really trying to stretch the boundaries in this space, we'd have had slightly slim pickings. I'm delighted to say that increasingly we're seeing a lot more of those sorts of enterprises, a lot more of that sort of leadership. But I do think that the three we have today are well worth having in our collective spotlight. And I just wonder whether I could ask our three panelists. I mean, all of you in one way or another have been talking about being startups, whether you're, founded in 2011 or you go back 17 years or 80 some years. And my question is this: most startups, if you think about Apple in the early days, and Steve Jobs had gone under, or Steve Wozniak perhaps, had gone under a bus, electric powered, hybrid, or whatever sort of bus, and was no longer with us. Apple might well not have happened in the way that we now experience it. And so my question to you three would be, what would happen if you suddenly, tomorrow, were not in your business? And maybe start with Patrick, because in a way, you're a much bigger company. You would expect to have strength and depth and a sort of very routine handover. But my sense is you're an unusual leader in this space, not to say a mutant. So what would happen in your case with Covestro?
Well, I guess one of the things I believe in, and that's a commonality with Steve Jobs, is the concept of purpose-driven leadership. I think if you talk to people in our company about what happens when they go home and their children ask them what they do, their normal answer would be to say something along the lines of, well, I make product X or I make product Y. They don't talk about the purpose of product. And what I spend a lot of my time doing, wherever I am in the world talking to our employees, is talking about the purpose of our company. We capture our purpose very simply as to make the world a brighter place. And when we use the word brighter in that case, we're talking about smarter as well as more bright in terms of its future. But that use of a purpose is very important, because when you say to somebody, well, what do you do? And he says, well, I make chemical X. And you say, well, why do you make it? He said, well, because it goes into making insulation. You say, well, why do you have insulation? Well, because that contributes to reducing energy wastage and improves resource efficiency, and that makes the world a brighter place. And we sort of use this core, and I noticed at the beginning of Apple, Steve Jobs very, very clearly went with purpose-driven leadership. He's probably one of the best examples of purpose-driven leadership. If you have a shared purpose as an organization, and if I can get that purpose shared by 16,000 people around the world, then I think people understand. We capture it with a hashtag called pushing boundaries. And if you look at a recent exhibition of materials that took place in Düsseldorf, there were 500 exhibitors. 35% of social media traffic came from us. We were pushing boundaries in every respect, in how we communicate, how we move the message, how we introduce new materials, how we show what can be done, and how we change people's ideas. And I think we often say in our company, we people come to us with impossible problems. We like people coming to us with impossible problems. When Bertrand Piccard came and said, build an aeroplane that can be as light as a small family car with the wingspan of a jumbo jet, we said, why not? You know, it's not about what's impossible. It's about why can't you do this? Let's find out how to do it. And by assembling the right people, we managed to get that to be possible. We couldn't actually find an aircraft maker who knew how to do it. We found a boat builder who knew how to do it because he didn't know it was impossible. And because he didn't know it was impossible, then the aeroplane was built and it flew around the world without a drop of fuel. Why not?
So I'm going to come on to Justin, but just before I do it, I mean, the question, Patrick, you gave a wonderful answer, but was about succession. It was about the role of individual leaders. And I suppose the question to all of the three of you is, are you confident that you have strength in depth in this sort of sustainable business area? And how can any of us know that we have that strength in depth?
Well, I guess I can kick in first, and with a short answer. Yes, we do have that depth. Yes, people believe in this. All of our 1,000 PhDs who work in research actually understand why they're working there and what they're trying to do. And I'm lucky enough to be surrounded by a whole group of people who share the same purpose. And it's actually when the purpose of the company aligns with your individual purpose that you achieve that sustainability within the organization.
Thank you. And Justin, you mentioned 50 years ago, a family-owned business creating the air conditioning industry in Asia, or helping to do that. Now this sort of transformative sort of approach that you've developed, I imagine that has a very clear purpose sitting at its heart. But again, do you have strength and depth in the leadership team? And if God forbid something happened to you, how would the rest of the organization cope with that?
I love what Patrick said in his answer, because we talk a lot about purpose and we talk a lot about values, and we tell a lot of stories. I think we keep our values alive and we keep our focus on the future alive by telling stories about the past. When you mentioned bringing air conditioning to this part of the world 50 years ago, our current chairman, who is 82, who was a relentless innovator and seriously still not acting his age in terms of wanting to try new things and do new things. He was the one, I think, he handed over to us a legacy of always looking to the future and asking, how can we do it differently and how can we do it better? I think we do. We spend a lot of time every day talking about how can we do what we do better? How can we improve and move forward? And we're very, very focused on the future. And the innovation part of what we do is critical to that, John, because I think that gets embedded in the company. We've got a real history and focus on letting our people dream. We let them dream, we let them try, and we let them fail. And we make it safe for them. I mean, no one likes losing money. But, you can lose money doing the same old thing as everyone else, or you can lose money trying to do new things. And I'm more scared about doing the same as everyone else than I am about doing something new. So we as the leadership, actually, we protect them by taking on that risk ourselves. And then we liberate them to dream and engage totally in possibility. And I think by continuing to live that every day, I mean, every company has a culture. And it's one of the things that I worry about, because whether the culture you have is the one you want, it's the one you deserve. And it's a result of what you do as leaders every day, because you can be adding to it or you can be eroding it. And I would like to think that we have such a strong focus and drive on building on that culture and continuing it into the future, that no one is indispensable. So I would like to think that we've laid the foundation and a culture of being here for many, many years.
And Justin, just to pick up on something that you said, you described an 80-year-old who is not acting his age, which I love the sound of.
82-year-old.
82-year-old, well, even better. But you also mentioned the L word, legacy. And in many situations, people talk increasingly about legacy. Leaders talk about leaving something note that they can be remembered for that is a positive. And some people are quite suspicious of that because they see people having succeeded in conventional terms through their careers, and then towards the end, just wanting to do something that puts some sparkle around their career that they can explain to their children or grandchildren or whatever. But in your case, it sounds as though legacy is very much a positive.
Yeah, I don't think we're not looking for accolades, and we're not looking for notoriety or fame. What we're looking for is to get better all of the time. By all means, we'll sit down and we will celebrate when we break a new record and we achieve better than we've ever done in the past. We will celebrate it and we will really enjoy ourselves. But one of the things that I've inherited from our chairman and that I'm the custodian for today is that we then get up the next day and we say, right, if we're honest and we look back at what we've just done and achieved, could we have done better? And how would we improve it? And so it's that relentless push to continue to try and improve. I mean, we have a fear of being a dinosaur, and we have a fear of being the fastest or the best dinosaur. We want to be in a part of the world that we know is going to be there because we're creating it.
Well, the dinosaurs, as we all know, are still with us. They just wear feathers and sit on telegraph lines. But so they've been quite adaptable, at least some of them. Johan, a question to you, and in a way, because you're relatively young as an organization, the legacy piece or some of that stuff perhaps doesn't apply to quite the same degree, but maybe it does feel able to disagree. But I suppose my question to you would be, I was with an organization yesterday in Paris, which is 10 years old, and one of the entrepreneurs behind it was saying, 95% plus of organizations die in their first 10 years, and of maybe the 5 that still survive, only 1 has been truly successful. So if you think about Bright and its future over the next few years, what do you see as the biggest barriers to your getting your products out into the market, delivering the impact that you clearly seek in the world? And where does competition play into all of that? Because there are a number of other people doing somewhat similar things. So how do you think about your competitors? Do you embrace them or fight them tooth and nail in the dark or in the solar light?
Yes, it's right. It's a very competitive market with a lot of. So it's all from the very cheap, typically Chinese-produced products that are unlabeled and just sold, to the more well-designed, high-quality products. So we aim to differentiate ourselves by producing products that are aspiring for all customers. So even if you are at the bottom of the pyramid or the poor tip in the world, we believe that they would like great products that look good and are good to use. So that's how we try to differentiate ourselves. And the key for us would be, so we live well now with the UN contract, but that has a time limit, and there will be new tenders, and we might be chosen this time around, and we might not. So the real challenge is to get into those commercial distribution channels that I mentioned earlier, and we've chosen a different model than most of our competitors. It must admit that a lot of these companies are typically founded outside of Africa, and then they establish their own organization, normally in East Africa, Kenya, or Uganda or Tanzania. But they are developing their own organization and building that up and building their own distribution. Whereas we are designing the products here. We are producing our products in China and Thailand as of today. But getting to crack into the code of how to use the existing networks that are already on the ground in Africa. Tapping into existing networks. There's a lot of SACCOs, as they're called, groups of everything from coffee to payments, loaning groups, etc. So that's really our. We have to crack that code. We haven't told it yet. We have a lot of engagement on the ground. We have active distributors in about 10 African countries as of now. So we think we really started that line, and we have spent a lot of efforts on R&D and developing new products. So one thing is light, but as I mentioned, there could be a lot of other things. And just thinking of internet and what you can do if you have the energy in the product, it's very easy to connect to the internet. Either if you have low bandwidth, you can have solutions for that, or if you reach out to the 3G connections, you can basically tap into all information that's currently unavailable for all those people. So we see this huge market opportunity, and one of our values is to be collaborative. So we don't try to take all this market. It's a huge market. It's enough for everybody, and the way we work is to integrate with collaborating with other organizations all across our value chain. So we don't fear the competition as such, but we really have to crack those codes. And one of the key issues that I can talk a little bit more is how to use to solve the finance solution. So just as an example, our product cost about $55 in the market. That can give the great light every day throughout the lifetime of the product, say 4 or 5 years. And it can charge your mobile phone. Today, a lot of people have to walk long distances, and it's dangerous, and it costs a lot of money just to get their phone charged. The alternative today is a simple kerosene light, which also the fuel for the kerosene light for 1 year costs $50. So the money is already there, but the problem is, like I mentioned, for the solar lamp, you have to pay the $50 up front. So what we're doing now is we're working with a Silicon Valley company called Angasa Design that has integrated technology in our products. So you can pay a small installment up front, for example, $5. The lamp can work for a month, and then you have to pay the new installment, and it can work for another month. And by this, the product becomes the bank. And you can then, of course, use this for larger systems, or you can even use that as a payment system for other services, from anything to water cleaning, or it could be health services, or whatever. So those are the really key challenges that we're working on in order to live longer than 10 years, which we still have a few years to. Yeah.
Thank you, Johan. Martin, can I ask another question?
Absolutely, please go, sir.
Because just listening, Africa, China, Asia, so on. One of the people at the event I was in Paris at yesterday was from the UN training program, very senior person indeed. And he basically said one of the biggest problems, in fact, he said the biggest problem we have in terms of sustainable development is bribery and corruption. And he pointed to the Global Compact 10th principle introduced in the second round, specifically on bribery and corruption. And I just wonder, for the three of you, whether you come across this issue, and part of the reason why people are concerned about it is not just simply the reputational issue, but that when people influence market outcomes through the use of bribery and corruption, what it typically does is to make decisions more narrow in terms of timescale, more tribal, more self-interested, which is not actually what we're wanting in the sustainable development space. So I don't know whether any of you got any suggestions on how business best addresses this really quite sensitive issue. Maybe Patrick, I could start with you on that one.
Thank you, John. Yes, I guess any business of our scale will come across corrupt business practices because we operate in almost every country in the world. And yesterday I was with the head of our Nigerian business, and we were talking about the rapid change in the culture in Nigeria as the realization, because of the oil price drop, that the pot was not as big as everybody thought it was from a bribery and corruption point of view. And so the new government is doing a lot of work to stamp out bribery and corruption because they need a real working economy. And I think it's not uncommon for us to find economies going in and out of cycles of corruption. What we do is, if there is any problem with corruption, we just walk away. And there are some activities we've tried to do at the base of the pyramid, or the level above the base of the pyramid, where we've just had to walk away because government officials have just started to try and take a large amount of the share of the value, and that doesn't work. So we just walk away, we go somewhere else. Luckily, there are plenty of fertile fields in the world for our work. So I'm never that worried that we can't find somewhere and people who are prepared to operate in a way that is not corrupt. So we follow sort of normal economic principles. If there is a corruption-free environment that delivers demand, that's where we will supply, and the laws of supply and demand retain. But we have a zero compliance policy in terms of ensuring. We have two very simple values in our company that we talk about, two little phrases. One says, nothing we do is worth getting hurt for, and that goes for everybody that works in our company. And the other is, nothing is worth going to jail for. And it's a sort of very simple phrase, but it's used across the whole company. And it's used at the beginning of every presentation I give anywhere in the world to our business team. And they know that's what we expect. And that's really an axiom of us doing business.
Fascinating. Thanks, Patrick. And Justin, how does CARE sort of deal with these sorts of issues, if indeed you encounter them?
Well, we work in a number of different countries in Asia, John, and it's an issue in some places, but it's just not something that we've ever been involved in or comes onto our radar. I don't know whether they avoid us or we avoid them, or it's a combination of both. I'm not aware of the report you mentioned, but as you were saying that people see that as the number one issue or a major issue for sustainability, it had me thinking that we use a slightly different phrase in our business. We think the number one issue with sustainability is the status quo. We often say that, I don't feel that people make a choice to do things that are not sustainable. I think they make a choice to stay the way they are because they're scared to what we call throw away the training wheels. And the price of hanging onto the past and doing things the way they've done them and keeping their training wheels on is that they're not able to achieve what they might be otherwise able to. I think they might achieve incremental things, but they don't achieve exponential things. If I had my way, I would ban the training wheels and throw them off everyone, because every now and again you will fall for sure and you will get hurt, but you soon discover, just as we watch the young ones ride bikes, that when you get rid of those training wheels, you end up going faster and further, and you can do things that you couldn't do before. So
it's a lovely,
from our
way
perspective,
of putting it.
Getting out there in the market and growing our business, we see the number one enemy as the status quo and the past.
And Johan, I wonder whether you come across this in Africa. One of the reasons I'm sensitive to these sorts of issues is in the mid-70s, I started to work with the UN Development Program in its first year in Egypt. So it was a UN project. And on that project was a Mr. 5%, who had been the previous Minister of Housing and Reconstruction. And there was a Mr. 3%, but it was very explicit, who had been a former mayor of the city of Cairo. And they made sure that the wheels were oiled and so on. But it was accepted, and I think increasingly these sorts of processes are more challenged than they were. But do you come across this, and if so, how do you deal with these sorts of issues?
Yeah, no. So far we've been lucky. We haven't had any issues related to corruption or bribery as such. A lot of our business so far has been that we sell our products directly from the factory. So we don't have that direct engagement in African countries. But we are very aware of this, of course, as we grow and using a lot of time training all our new employees. We have now local employees in Africa. We spend time training, having very clear rules, just like we mentioned before here, that corruption is not acceptable at any stage, and we're working with governments or people connected to governments. We have checklists for what we need to, in particular, be aware of in that case, or hiring people that has been involved, and then we need written consent. Examples like that. So far, we've been lucky or skilled, or I don't know, but we have at least not have that problem. But we're definitely working in markets where this is a huge issue, and we have to be particularly aware.
Yeah. Well, thank you all three for dealing with a very sensitive issue. Martin, I'm going to hand back to you at this stage, but there is a question that at some point in this I'd love to come on to, which is the role of government and how our panelists see that in the future. Because in the past, business would often have said, get government off our backs and everything will be fine. Increasingly, we're starting to hear people saying, we need the right sort of government policy and incentives to do some of the stuff that we're going to do. But let me hand back to you.
And I think this actually fits together with what I was kind of trying to get into, still in the competitive space, in the market space. One of my deep feelings is that actually the Sustainable Development Goals could be a recipe book for a blue ocean strategy. Create your own market. Justin, I think you mentioned that specifically. And there, of course, the question, how much can governments support that process or hinder it, or where is that role? Now, maybe to just start off with Justin, you basically changed the name of the game in the market space. You mentioned beforehand a lot out of fear of just being left alone. Now, today, you're successful. It looks so easy. It looks so obvious. But I can imagine in the first instance, when you say, well, I'm not going to sell you equipment anymore, I'll sell you air, you probably got the startled face. How did you pick up the customer in the marketplace and created this completely new space? How did you go about that?
Quite a few years in doing the wrong thing. So we had a great learning bank, and I say that's why we, to what Patrick alluded to earlier, we see ourselves as a constant startup, Martin, because although we have a model now that is gaining great traction and doing really well, we're also fixated on how do we move it forward in the future? How do we keep getting better? I think in terms of competition, I suppose I'd say two things. We believe, and I push this very hard with our people, that the real competition is us. It's internal. Are we doing better every day in every way? Are we achieving more and more, and are we living up to our values? And if we're very focused on that and looking forward and where we're going, I think we can handle the competition, who I prefer to see really in the rear view mirror, because most of them are still doing it the same old way. We've got a few people who are trying to mimic what we do, but we keep more of an eye on the front than we do on the back. Now, you can't completely ignore competition, but maybe we're not able to look forwards and backwards at the same times. And I think if you concentrate more on the forward and where you're going and what you're doing and how you're improving, that the competition will look after itself. I mentioned before that the big competition is the status quo, but I think what we've really learned is when we first started out, we were looking to sell to people, and we chased orders. Now I think, I know now we really, really focus on working with people who believe what we believe. And that's a very different space. There's still challenges there, and you've got to provide tremendous value, and you've got to address their pain and their problems. But they want to be in your world, and they want to be in the world that you're creating. And that's made a big difference to us. And it changes the mindset of the way your people work and operate and how they see the future. It's much more engaged in possibility. So chasing the customers and competition for us is more of a case of getting better at what we do, looking for those people who believe what we believe, and looking forward and getting better all of the time.
Brilliant. So, that's almost a leverage over to Patrick here, asking the same question, but maybe with a different angle. You're a big public company. Investors are all over your back. You have to report frequently. And there's this notion that they're the bad guys, and they wouldn't allow you to do what you do. You obviously made it. You've given them a nice return. I think you tripled the share price in the last few years, which is phenomenal. But again, how did you make that? How did you take them on board? And I'm very much wanting to hear this how, because I think there's a lot of people out there who kind of get it's important, but that how is not always so easy. So what's your answer, Patrick?
Well, I think the how is interesting with the investment community, because historically, if we go back into the last 2 or 3 decades, there have been these slightly odd things like the Dow Jones Sustainability Index and things which have been sort of put up there as markers for companies that you invest in if you want to invest in sustainability. I can tell you when we went around looking at whether we as a public company should join such indices, we decided very quickly that we wouldn't, because we looked at who was good at it and we didn't actually believe that many of those companies were sustainable in the way that we think of sustainability. So we've avoided all of that, and we're doing quite a lot of work at the moment on some new ideas about metrics and measurements, particularly around, for our industry, carbon productivity. So how much return do you get on carbon employed, which is a much more investor type language. When we go and talk to investors, we always talk very honestly about why we grow fast, and we explain to them that we grow by substituting poorer performing materials. And they get it, I mean, a very simple story. We tell them that in the electric vehicle market, we put 3 times as much material as into a conventional car, because an electric vehicle needs much more sophisticated materials to provide thermal insulation, to provide protection for the batteries, to provide lightweighting, lots and lots of different features, not least of which charging stations, which need to be vandal-proof and all of these sort of things. So you need very different materials. So we explain all the time the stories. We relate it back to things they understand and trends that they can see. When you look at our growth in China, it's very simply driven in the automotive space by government incentives that the government wants to have lower emission vehicles, and they're supporting the registration of electric vehicles by not charging any registration tax. So these are facts that you cannot dispute, and they're government behaviors which are there, and that leads you to stories you can tell which explain why we grow so quickly and why we enjoy such good profitable growth. We're playing to these hotspots. We're playing to these opportunities where you can make significant change. And it's not just incremental. It really is breakthroughs in how you think about materials and how you think about choosing something other than boring steel and boring glass. That's really what it's all about. So I think the investor community understands. I'll give you one anecdote. During our first roadshow, to sell the stock at the IPO, we were sitting in Switzerland, and a wonderful investment manager from a private wealth fund had traveled right the way across Switzerland to come and see our roadshow, and came in and said, look, you're the guys that are substituting aluminium with carbon fiber composites that are half the weight. And that's why I'm going to invest in you, because I don't believe aluminium is sustainable. It's too high energy content, it uses up too much power, it produces lots of emissions. I think what you're doing makes sense. And when you have investors coming to you who have understood the story and actually play the story back to you as to why they want to invest, then you're in the right space. And a lot of it is through storytelling. You've got to explain this connection back from a chemical product or a polymer or a material back to how it makes the world a brighter place, or not. And if it's not, then begin to realize that it will not be in your portfolio for very long. So it's not all about adding good stuff. It's about getting rid of stuff that is probably not going to survive in the long term. You've got to continuously change the portfolio, continuously reinvent. 40% of the things we sell today didn't exist 5 years ago. That's the level of innovation. That's the pulse of innovation. That's what you've got to keep pushing. And the key to it is failing fast. Celebrate failure, get the failures out of the way and move on. Because every time you fail, you release bright people who can now work on the next project. We have no shortage of projects to work on. The bright spots are all there. We just have limited resource to put onto the project. So when you fail on one, move on to the next one. Get over it. Have a party.
But just to get a little bit of feeling for how much of your success of that incredible growth story on the markets would you attribute to this sustainability strategy, or how much would you have achieved anyway? Because the projects are there, people needs to move on. So do you think it's all addressable there, or what's your feel there?
It's really difficult to answer the question because it's so embedded in our strategy. There is no escaping it. I have a one-page slide that describes to our investors our strategy, and the bottom line of the slide, it just says, with sustainability embedded in every element of the strategy. It's just like, that's like the underlining of everything that we do. We talk about innovation. We talk about what we have to do with our asset footprint around the world, how we invest in innovation. But at the end of the day, all of it is underlined by sustainability. And everybody gets the fact that there are some trends, and you can call those the sustainability development goals. There are some trends that the world wants to follow, and that will generate, as John mentioned in his introduction, a huge amount of business. And we are in that sweet spot. We quite often have very major investors who call our investor relations group and talk to our chief sustainability officer about where is the truth in our story and where is the truth in other people's stories. Because there's so much greenwashing out there, investors find it difficult to work it out. And we have to be prepared to spend hours sometimes on the telephone explaining why our story represents a genuine growth story and where that growth comes from by substituting less sustainable materials.
So it basically hooks into this whole purpose and alignment of everybody, which
Absolutely.
Obviously with a very big company is essential.
Yeah.
Coming back here to Bright. Now you've done something very interesting. You're saying a affordable product doesn't have to look ugly. And the second thing is you use the in a certain way, the development aid to basically get very fast the stability. But I think you're not relying on that. So building up market in the startup space is, of course, a very different endeavor. Explain that to us, how you basically use that as a springboard into a new market.
Yeah. If I can just add a little bit to also the sustainability comments that has been made and how we work with sustainability as part of our business, because that, I think that's important just to understand how we operate. So we, by selling the products we do, we believe we contribute to sustainable development goals and good purpose for the world. So as such, but in order to be successful in that, we're working very closely with the Future Fit Foundation that John has been instrumental in developing, and which is I understand the YPO has been introduced to the framework at some point, so a lot of you, I'm sure, knows it. But that's for us, it's a tool to evaluate our whole value chain and how we perform. So we just don't look at what our products do. We look at how our suppliers are working, how they treat their employees, and what the waste they have, etc. Of course, how we do our own operations and how the product works, and everything from customers' concern to the waste or the end use of the product, etc. And we use this to assess that, but also when we get people on board, we make sure they are aligned with those values. And if they're not, we don't get them on board. And with our partners, we use that to making sure we have the same values or set of thinking before we work with a distributor, for example, or a new supplier or anything like that. But to the question of a government and how that helps, yes, we have. So we indirectly, of course, sell our products through aid money. Governments give money to UN and they buy our products. And the products with that model they're handed out for free. And we do see a future market there, definitely. Could be other type of NGOs or like the Doctors Without Borders. They need light for us. There are a lot of opportunities for us there as well. And we're then using the cash flow from that business to develop our other activities and new products. And we also see there's a huge, all this talk now about sustainable development goals, and a lot of the aid community are increasingly realizing the value of business, like you mentioned in your introduction, Martin, the need for business to solve these problems. I also worked earlier for a Norwegian DFI, Norfund, similar to IFC or CDC in Britain, etc. And that was 10 years back, and now we see that there's a lot more interest or really need to engage the private business, both from the government to hand out the money, but also from all the NGOs who are receiving the money. So they see in order to have good products that can have great impact, they need to cooperate. So we're working very actively in seeking cooperation models where we can use the networks of the NGOs, but they need the business knowledge that we bring in. And for example, one thing we're discussing now is how we can help NGOs actually measuring impact directly from the product. So if we have a product that can make sure that the end user can communicate directly back how they're using the product, or if they have been to school every day, for example, or have they gotten the nutrition they needed, we can establish a sort of an impact link, helping aid to be much more effective by using our products. But it's so that's how we work with government.
That's what you're mentioning as well is actually one piece of advice Salim Ismail's book from Singularity University on exponential information highlights. Do the one thing you are doing very well, and then network. Use the crowd, use the masses in order to gain that exponential momentum. And I'm hearing very much that behind your strategy. But let me stick a little bit longer on this question of how. So what's behind your success? Or maybe from a different angle, what would you do different if you had the chance to repeat the last few years? And let me start this with, again, maybe Patrick. Is the key in splitting off from this giant Bayer? Is the key the iconic project with Bernard Picard? I'm asking this question really for giving guidance to the audience who is willing to go for it, saying what really does it depend on?
Well, it's a really good question, and there's no single answer. The answer is the use of the word "and." It's a whole load of things. It's not one thing or another. It's lots of things, and they all must be there. I think the splitting off from our parent was a very important moment, because although we're very proud of our history, we're certainly not constrained by it. And that gave us an opportunity to what I call the Control-Alt-Delete moment, where you can just reset. You have to go and press the reset button and decide what it is you really want to do. What is your purpose as a company? And do your employees want to align with that purpose? And you've got to find that space. And I think we have clearly found that, and I've explained that. You then have to find your partners. And I'll give you a recent example, which has received quite a lot of coverage in social media, when we got together with one of our direct competitors, BASF, and the Audi car company to develop a bio-based coating to be used on the new Q2, which is going out in the next few months and is being launched. And it's really, you got to be prepared to work with people you wouldn't normally expect to work with. And you wouldn't normally expect to see big giant car companies and two competitors working together to solve a problem, to find a non-oil-based top coat for a car which performs better than any other coatings out there. Well, you need to be able to do this. You need to be able to think about licensing the technologies you've come up with. So one of the things we've said is this carbon dioxide material that can be used to make materials like plastics and furniture cushioning, insulation foam. I'm totally prepared to license that to anybody, because actually I want to see it establishing a new norm. That's how you get breakthroughs. You can't, the old Porter model of holding on to competitive advantage doesn't actually work, because if you're running fast enough and you're actually moving quickly enough, you can afford to take the market with you and move the market by taking these new inventions out there by licensing and sub-licensing. These are all the things that actually make the difference, because that speeds up and short circuits what everybody else thinks of as a competitive dynamic. You actually break it and you set a new standard. So for some of the materials we make, we invented them, licensed them to all of our competitors, and they set a new standard. You move the whole industry forward. You actually take the change that you have made and multiply it by allowing other people to have access to the know-how and allowing them to use it and selling that know-how. There's lots of ways of making product. You don't have to be 100% market share of the product. You can just be the inventor and the licensor. It's very similar to the care model of actually selling something very different. Sell your know-how, sell your inventions, sell your breakthroughs, and get other people to adopt them and to take them to market.
Beautiful bridge here to Justin, because you also highlighted here this change of dynamic, the increasing speed, where if you stick to the old, your competitive advantage, you might not be existing very quickly anymore. And I think that's what drove you, Justin, a lot, your company, in venturing new. But looking back at the last few years, again, the how, what would you do different? What did you learn on this path? What kind of threat lines would you try to avoid if you had a second chance?
I would, I'd share two things with you, Martin. One is, we made a little bit of a mistake when we started to sell sustainability instead of selling our purpose and our values. And sustainability is a consequence of those things. And I'll tell you a story. We did some work on a school campus, which is only a couple of kilometres here from our office in 12, 15 years ago. And we increased the size of the school by 50%. And there was zero increase in energy, water consumption, carbon emissions. So they got the growth without any further impact. Now they went to build another school within 5 years, and we didn't win the business. I think we had positioned ourselves very much around a savings perspective. 3 years ago, with our new model, we signed up a campus which is also within a couple of kilometres of our office. And we took them through an expansion where they increased the school size by 100%. And we actually reduced the energy consumption and the water consumption. Now, we have a 15-year contract with them under our model today. And the difference between the two was, in one instance, we were selling efficiency and sustainability and savings. And the other instance, we were selling our values and our purpose and who we are. And that has got us much more traction with the customer. And we've achieved even better metrics for them. The other thing that I've learned internally, there were some references before from Johan and Patrick about innovation. What we have seen is we have a lot of engineers because we make no products. We put things together in a better way to create more and use less. We have engineers, therefore, who do design. And, I've seen when we were operating in the old world, we used to often design systems for buildings and facilities where they would ask us to guarantee performance. We want you to achieve this and use this much energy or this much water, or our carbon footprint has to be below this. And when those metrics were put in front of our engineers, we would always achieve 5 or 10% under the guarantee. I describe it as when they were asked to run the 100 meters and they were told, if you don't run it in 12 seconds, I will penalize you and you will pay. What we've learned in the new model is we hold our engineers and our people up to our values. We never specify a result they've got to achieve. We specify they must show us how the values come alive and what they've done. And when they're liberated and they're designing to values and they're not designing to a guarantee, they turn around and they run it in about 9.5 seconds, because they're not focused on the 12, they're focused on possibility. And that's really seen us exponentially achieve much, much better results in the market. So it's about the people you talk to and the people you work with. I think you want to work with people whose eyes light up when you talk to them. There's lots of people who are interested in sustainability. There's not so many, I think, who are interested in giving away the status quo to embark on that journey that's going to lead to sustainability. So you need to sort out who are those people whose eyes light up when you talk to them. And when you bring people into your company and within your company, are their eyes constantly being lit up by your purpose and your values and what you're doing?
Fantastic. And that is basically almost fitting then to Bright, coming up with iconic designs and just creating products which are desirable. But also to you, I mean, you're still in a very young situation. You've ventured out there. Maybe on your end, describe me a little bit the challenge side of things and how you're trying to get across those.
Yes, I think one can mention two things also. So the first one, that's, I guess, is a classic that you have when the company was founded. The founder started as a CEO, and after a few years, moving the company into more, operational phase and building for scale. A new CEO was invited, my now boss, and there was this overlap period where the founder was board of directors and she was CEO, and he was also having an operational role in the company, which was very challenging for almost a full year. So just setting up that governance structure right when you're moving from the first invention phase to the next building scale phase is something we very, I mean, this is the stories you'll read about, but it also was a great challenge for Bright. But we now have a much more stringent structure that works. Another thing I think I mentioned briefly is when we design new products, the importance of having the sustainability criteria already in front of us all the time when we design the product. So don't design the product and then start thinking of how do we reduce waste, or how do we actually teach the people about how to use it, or whatever happens with after use. So we need to be sure that those criteria are in the front of everybody's mind. We talked a lot about values, so it's the same. It's just having those values. So integrating all the sustainability thinking in our business decisions, so it makes a natural choice starting from the early design of a new product, is something we are now doing, I would say, a lot better than when we started.
Wow. Fascinating. I'm seeing here a little bit, we are coming not quite to the close, but before we do that, I would like to really start capturing also your opinions of what we've gone through. So we have here 3 different companies, 3 different life stages, sizes. What are sort of the similarities? What is the lesson learned from also your perspective? What I'm personally hearing is there's no excuses, anybody can do it, from big to small, existing to startup. I'm hearing it's actually not an option, it's a survival strategy in an ironic way. I'm hearing that clearly leadership and purpose is key. And I'm hearing a lot of investment into mindset, culture, beyond also the own walls, so not only internal. I'm hearing a blue ocean strategy opportunity, beacon projects being probably helpful, but also not relying on that first success. It's a continuous endeavor, very much along those speeding up markets out there, independent, and this actually being a beautiful opportunity to capture this challenge on very good feel. But these are just a few highlights. Maybe, John, you're seeing also companies beyond this. What would be your sort of keywords, takeaways, and summaries before we then maybe take it to the 3 panelists as well?
Well, I've been fascinated to listen to the panelists sharing their perspectives and lessons learned along the way. I think we're at a very pivotal moment in the sustainable development industry. I mean, in a way, we've got the Sustainable Development Goals. In a way, we've got the COP21 Paris Climate Agreement. But there's a lot of talk about disruption at the moment. And most people in sustainability organizations are talking about other people being disrupted by digitalization or whatever it's going to be. But if there's one industry I think that needs disruption off the scale more than most others, it's the sustainable development industry itself. And I think this set of conversations has begun to illuminate that. Next week, I'm in Johan's country, Norway again, in Oslo, and I've been asked to propose a vote of thanks to Gro Harlem Brundtland, who 30 years ago, with the Brundtland Commission report, put sustainability and sustainable development on the international agenda. Well, it's taken a long time. It's almost a generational timescale for it to get to the point where people now acknowledge that this stuff needs to be done, and we have the goals and we have the targets and so on. But business really is now, in the way that they weren't with the Millennium Development Goals, seem to be absolutely central to making the change that is now needed globally to happen. And I think the problem again is that most business leaders, unlike the ones that we have here, continue to see this as an incremental few percentage points of improvement agenda. I don't underestimate the recharge or refresh element of this. So, for example, I go straight from Oslo to Switzerland. I'm there with Nestle. Nestle have done a fair amount over the years, partly because they've been driven to do so. But they've now got a new CEO, who comes from a totally different industry, without much experience of the sort of the pressures that brands can come under. And I think, again, we've got to recognize it isn't simply diving into the exponential future and engaging the entrepreneurial, innovative people in the exciting parts of the world. We've got to continuously work with the people who are still coming into this space, still having a huge amount to learn. And I'm sure that includes some of the YPO members, but fantastic to have this audience and fantastic to get these three panelists today. Back to you, Martin.
So, reaching it now to the panelists, maybe starting with Johan, what is sort of your takeaway from this conversation?
Starting with me, right?
Please.
Yeah. No, I see time is very limited here, so I'll just be brief. My thoughts when I hear all this is how about all the doing business relates to sustainability. Is moved from sustainability being something you do as a lip service if you have a report or something, just making sure you do something right, to a lot of companies are looking into the business opportunities that are really, really great out there. Has been mentioned a lot today. But now, and what we see sort of next phase maybe is that it will be almost like a license to operate. So a lot of our customers, particularly in the UN or in those type of customers, is that if we can't really prove that the way we do business is done in a proper manner or sustainable manner, whatever you want to call it, we are simply not eligible for supplying goods because we're out of market. So it's, of course, we do these things because it's the right thing to do, but we also see it as absolutely necessity to be able to be relevant to the markets going forward.
Cool. Justin?
I would say, Martin, you need to throw away fear, and you need to throw away the training wheels, and you need to be completely engaged in possibility and opportunity. The way I see the world and the way we operate, we can't see, we think it's being lazy if you can't see ways to do what you do as a business better for the world, better for the planet, better for the bottom line, better for the people. The answer is that the resources are there. And it has to be this maniacal drive to find those answers and find those opportunities, engage in that possibility, and sustainability will therefore be the consequence and front and center of what you're doing.
And certainly one takeaway for me is your example with the bicycle and the training wheels. I think that pretty much nails it. Beautiful. But Patrick, what is your conclusion?
I think what we haven't talked a lot about is technology, because I think technology is naturally exponential. I think we can find answers in technology and we can drive the exponential change and make breakthroughs in technology as long as we can cast away our shackles, because human beings are not intrinsically exponential. Human beings are probably much more linear in their way of behaving. So for me, the challenge is a human challenge, and I think we focus very heavily upon the human challenge. If we can get humans to behave in an exponential way and successive generations to behave in an exponential way, then we will achieve the dramatic exponential change. I'm less worried about technology than I am about people. And I think my final thought would just be a very simple one. It's the job of leaders of enterprises not to produce followers. It's to produce the leaders. because a leader's role is to ensure there are leaders coming behind, not just followers. And that will ensure that we will manage to achieve sustainable exponential breakthrough, which has got to last for years and years. And it's got to be much faster. You know, each of us has a shot at running a company for a while, and that's fine, but you've got to make sure there are people coming behind with the same purpose. So I think we've talked a lot today about purpose and values and people, which I find highly encouraging, because the technology piece, I think we can solve, because technology works in an exponential way. We know that.
Very well observed, and in a funny way, it actually links me back to YPO, and the one very strong mechanism we have is this forum where we actually work on our own learning and experience path and share that human angle. And this is actually something which is for the audience really in my thinking of how to possibly create a forum exactly for this topic. How do we change our business models to future sustainability in more the survivability maybe angle of it, and maybe coming together with a few enterprises and going on that path together. An idea, and certainly if anybody around would be interested to join, please do reach out. But yeah, as we close, maybe John, may I invite you to kind of wrap it up?
Thank you, Martin. And in the interest of time, I'll simply say thank you immensely to our three panelists for taking time out of their extraordinarily busy day and being candid and sharing their wisdom and some of the lessons learned along the way. Martin, huge thanks to you for making this happen, and thanks to your audience for being involved. And as you say, if there's feedback from anyone who's listened to any of this or watched some of this, we'd be fascinated to hear. So back to you. Thank you all.
Thank you. And with that, we're closing today's session. I wish you all a wonderful rest of the day. A lot of success for your corporates, companies, for yourself. The planet needs it. We all need it. Have a great day. Thanks.